Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another edition of Monuments Monday. And again, we're doing our monuments, markers, and tablets in the town of Gettysburg. So, last week we talked a little bit about the retreat of the 11th Army Corps through the northern suburbs of Gettysburg, and today the monuments we're going to talk about are associated with the retreat of the 1st Army Corps from the fields west of the town. And monument number 12, Company D of the 149th Pennsylvania. And this marker, and I know that I play around with what markers I'm going to count on my list and which ones I am not. This particular marker technically is on National Military Park property, and it's also in the borough. But you can look across and you can see the monument on the other side of the intersection, and just down and to the left of it is a marker for the boundary of the Gettysburg National Military Park. Is kind of interesting. And the marker at this site was originally placed in the 1880s. I don't have an exact date for it, but it was definitely placed prior to 1888. And we have a few photographs of it here I'm going to show. The regimental monument for the 149th Pennsylvania Volunteers was dedicated out on the first day's battlefield on October 20th, 1886. And so then this was placed near that time or a short time later. Now, Company D of the 149th Pennsylvania had actually been detached from the rest of the regiment, and they were serving as headquarters guard for General Abner Doubleday. And on the afternoon of the first day's fighting, while the rest of the 149th Pennsylvania Volunteers were out near the McPherson farm, they were actually here behind the seminary. And as the Union line broke and started to retreat through the town, and massive amounts of Southerners were hitting this area, and this area part of Perrin's South Carolina Brigade, Abner Doubleday ordered his headquarters guard out to this intersection to try to hold back the Southern retreat. They maintained this position for a few minutes, and then, along with the rest of the Northern Army, retreated through the town. And while they were at this location, Joseph Baldwin of Company D, 149th Pennsylvania, was killed, and Alexander Stewart was mortally wounded. Of course, Alexander Stewart would be taken into the town, would be cared for by Sally Myers, and die in her house. And eventually, she ended up marrying his brother. And the families of Alexander Stewart and Joseph Baldwin put up this original marker at this location in the 1880s. At some later point, Joseph Baldwin's brother replaced that small marker with a more substantial monument that we see here today. And so this makes our list as number 12. But of course, it ended up replacing one that was previously here. I'd really like to know what happened to the original monument. One last thing, Henry Stewart, the son of Henry Stewart and the nephew of Alexander Stewart, who was mortally wounded here, actually took a photograph looking up Middle Street into this area where this fighting occurred in the 1880s, and we'll provide it here so you can see it. Monument number 13, is the 4 p.m. position of the 95th New York. And I got to tell you, this is certainly one of the more unnoticed monuments on the battlefield and one of the more obscure markers that exists. And so the 95th New York have a regimental monument out near the railroad cut, near the bridge where Reynolds Avenue crosses the railroad cut, where they were involved in heavy fighting on the mid-morning of July 1st. And that monument is placed here in 1893. So we believe at the same time they put markers as secondary position markers. I don't know if you remember the question in the questions about monuments somebody sent us about the secondary position markers, but this unit has 4 secondary position markers. I wonder if, since they have 4, should we call them all secondary position or third position or fourth position monuments? But this particular unit has a regimental monument, and then they have a marker for their 10 a.m. position on July 1st. They have a marker for their 12 noon position on July 1st. They have a marker for their 4 p.m. position on July 1st. And there's a marker on Culp's Hill for their July 2nd and 3rd position. So this is the regiment that has the most markers on the battlefield to a single regiment. Of course, they're tied with another unit that we made a previous video about, the 27th Connecticut Infantry. So if you want to come out here, we're on the property of the Lutheran Theological Seminary near the intersection of Seminary Ridge, which originally, remember, was called West Confederate Avenue, and the Chambersburg Turnpike in front of Lee's headquarters. And as part of Lysander Cutler's brigade, this is where this unit was when the Southern Army overran Seminary Ridge, and the 95th New York, along with the rest of the 1st Army Corps, retreated through the town. And remember, in the first day's battle, some 20,000 Northern soldiers retreated through the town and were being chased by some 30,000 Southerners, and 2,000 civilians were hiding in their cellars as this fighting took place. Number 14 on our count is the monument to Chaplain Horatio Howe of the 90th Pennsylvania Volunteers. And this particular monument was dedicated on September 1st, 1889. And it's a really interesting monument, and it says on it, "In Memoriam, Reverend Horatio S. Howe, chaplain, 90th Pennsylvania Volunteers, was cruelly shot dead on these church steps on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863. And then it has a Bible verse on the plaque. Now, fascinating, the story of Horatio Howe, and there are a bunch of versions of how he was actually killed. And basically, on July 1st, 1863, there was heavy fighting as the Northern Army retreated through the town of Gettysburg. And at one point, there were thousands of men retreating along the street here in front of the church. This church had been established as a hospital for Robinson's division of the 1st Army Corps early in the afternoon fight. And I could give you different references to exactly how he was killed. So there's an account in New York at Gettysburg, and it's told by Captain Archibald Snow of the 97th New York. Snow was then a sergeant in the 97th New York, and he knew Chaplain Howe by sight, as both belonged to the same brigade. Snow was shot through the jaw and went to the Lutheran hospital where his wound was dressed. He then started to leave the hospital, and passing through the front door of the church just behind Chaplain Howe, at the same time when the advancing skirmishers of the Confederate Army were coming up the street on a run. The first skirmisher arrived at the foot of the church steps just as the chaplain and Snow were coming out. Placing one foot on the first step, the soldier called to the chaplain to surrender. But Howe, instead of throwing his hands up promptly and uttering the usual "I surrender," attempted some dignified explanation to the effect that he was a non-combatant and as such was exempt from capture, when a shot rang out from the skirmisher's rifle, ending the controversy. The man who fired the shot stood on the exact spot where the memorial tablet has since been erected, and Chaplain Howe fell upon the landing at the top of the steps. And this was written in 1902. Remember, if you like the content that we've been putting up on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe.